In recent years, super tall buildings have been emerging again at an unprecedented scale, especially in Asia and the Middle East. This session explored the idea of the tall building as an icon. The first presentation looked at the Shanghai Tower, presented by Arthur Gensler of Gensler Architects. This iconic tower, which has commenced construction, is a government-supported development to complete the trio of super tall towers in Shanghai's Pudong district. The Jinmao building symbolizes China's past. The Shanghai World Financial Center symbolizes China's present. And the Shanghai Tower is intended to symbolize China's future.
But our third building and the final structure represents, we believe, China's future. This is both the future of the city along the Haopeng River and the Chinese spirit is a building whose shape is derived from all the things that are natural. It is embodied in the knowledge of the past, the requirements and present of the inspiration for the future. The building's form is open, and this is really critical. The building we wanted as a building for the people in Shanghai, something that they would feel comfortable with, approach, and that was part of the city's requirements, and I think it's helped us to make a great building.
While the building is clearly intended to be a symbol and an icon, substantial time and effort were invested in maximizing the efficiency for the tower and integrating sustainable elements.
Here's the wind tunnel test. We started with a small wind tunnel test on the lower right-hand corner, and then when we decided we would really go for it, we built a 7-meter tall model, and then modeled both Jinmao and World Financial Center, and allowing us to prove that we could reduce the structural loads by 24%. One of the things that we've talked about is this intelligent skin. We've got an outer skin, which is really the barrier skin. It's a single laminate glazing system with a frit pattern on it that varies between the north, south, east, west. We've designed the frit system to be very much in line with the solar orientation. And then the inside wall type on the cylinders is a double glazed insulated wall glazing system. These are the efficiencies we're trying to get to. Lighting controls 24% below normal, envelope 7% below normal, central plant 36%, HVAC 33%, and that's about 15 million RMB of dollars per year, which amounts to about $2.5 million worth of savings a year in energy costs.
In his presentation about the Gazprom Tower in St. Petersburg, Tony Kettle commented on the debate about designing a super tall building in a city whose historic center has been recognized as a World Heritage Site.
And really, it raises a question, what do you do in a historical fabric which is going to need huge investment just to protect it and have it conserved continuously year on year? And what do you do to try and bring new investment in without spoiling it? And also, if you bring a tower object or any kind of landmark structure in there, if it was so far away from the center of the city as to not be seen at all, would it have any relevance? It might as well be in Moscow or in another city. So there's this balance between bringing the tower close enough to the city center to act as part of the whole composition and having it so far away that it doesn't work anymore.
He argued that the location of the tower, a brownfield regeneration site, is not a threat to the character of the preservation area, and that in a city with an iconic history, there should be room for an iconic future.
And the city developed over many years, and it had many vertical elements within it. Vertical dominance, as they like to call them in Russia. And these were removed by the Nazis during the bombing of the huge siege of Leningrad. So nowadays there are only a few vertical dominants left. And you see the ones removed. Some of these vertical dominants, unfortunately, are industrial development. They have local power stations, and so the skyline of churches and cathedrals is shared with chimney stacks. And with the docks were very important because it was the survival of St. Petersburg was all about trade with the West. It was called Window on the West. So it was a very important part of the city. And then when the communist era came in, they constructed a communication tower which you see on the left here next to Peter and Paul Cathedral. And this is actually illuminated like a Christmas tree at night. And it's the same height as the Eiffel Tower, 312 meters. So this is kind of bizarre kind of response to what we're doing going on, where they say, this is a tall building for the city, it's going to spoil the city, and yet here they have a choice. They could leave this building unilluminated, they could just have the red dot at the top to avoid it from hitting aircraft, but no, they decide to celebrate it. They decide there's something important about this building, and let's really make it obvious at night and let it sit beside the historical fabric. But basically there's this kind of strange response. On the one hand, there's a vertical dominant, which they celebrate. On the other hand, they don't want a new one, which is from this century.
By comparing East and West Coast cities in the United States, Clark Manus recommended more attention to the urban space between the tall buildings and the livability of city centers and communities. One cannot look at the tall building in isolation, but must consider how it works in the urban fabric.
So where does that lead us? I know, based on my own particular experience and our firm's experience and what the AI has been doing, is we really need to be talking about livable and sustainable communities, not buildings in isolation. We all like tall buildings. We all think they're graceful. They all think they provide an opportunity in that. And the importance of whether the building is green or it's transit-oriented or livable or walkable is a real key thing.
Manus also touched on the issues of height and how different cities have different perceptions of its impact, but advocated its necessity to achieve sustainable densities.
Here's 3 cities, and some of you know the idiosyncrasies of this. One is the one in New York, one is the one in Chicago here, and one is the one in San Francisco, and I use this as an example. So if you look at Heinz's and Nouvelle Tower, I mean, there was a decision recently which is hard to even comprehend, that they would actually take 200 feet off of a building that was actually built and or actually under construction because of the fear that the building would actually take away from the Chrysler building's iconic nature. And we talk about iconic towers. The Chicago Spire, it's 200 feet taller than the Sears Tower, and the nature of that, actually, if you looked at the presentation this morning, it's remarkable in terms of its scale on the skyline. And I asked earlier, I know about Philadelphia, having been there, is what the nature of skyline developments are. And this group here, which is a really pretty robust group of people who have great experience, we look at buildings sort of in isolation because that's really what we're hired to do. But the importance of the skyline character is really key. And the third, really, which is sort of even an amazing evolution in the last 20 years, and I think was derived from ultimately the demolition of the Embarcadero Freeway, is the competition winning by Heinz and Pelly on a transit tower. And the arguments that have been going on in the course of the rezoning for probably the course of 2 years is whether the building is 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet. So you look at this in the scheme of things and you begin to understand that across the U.S. there are really different measures about the way people feel that height belongs in their community. And as Tony said, in St. Petersburg, a historic city, there is a fundamental visceral reaction to height, and somehow it needs to be addressed. And I think that's part of a bigger dialogue.
How hard is it to stand out as an iconic skyscraper when so many super towers are trying to be iconic?
I'm hopeful that we don't get into this game of some of the buildings that I've seen, which are incredibly ridiculous to me geometries that don't work for the user at all, have no interest in thinking about the user. And I think we as designers have an incredible obligation to create facilities that both work for the user, are good investments for the developers, and are a great enhancement to the community.
I think actually the recession has had a very positive effect in some regard, because the kind of outlandish designs that were proposed for some parts of the Middle East have been drawn back. And I think we should just return to doing proper architecture. I think with regard to icons, well, people decide if they're icons or not. And I think once every 100 years you're allowed one, in St. Petersburg anyway, hopefully.
I guess my thought is I hope the word is less used. We seem to overuse it, and I think that the marketing pitch about them iconic is really, it's tired. I think My view is I'd rather see iconic skylines. You know, do I think that we will stop building buildings that have a noticeable presence? No. I mean, if you look back 50 years, we could have said that 50 years ago, and, you know, human civilization will continue to sort of challenge that. But I would challenge a group like this to actually take a bigger stance in terms of its position and how skylines get formed, because tall buildings are part of creating that, and that's why people go to certain cities, because they have a great character to them embodied by their initial impact in coming to that city.